by about 1935, things kind of changed a lot. People were working in Detroit. Nice cars had come out. Ford had some nice stuff. We were always Ford thinking. And because one of the persons there, Eva's husband, who was her boyfriend then, bought a 35 Ford Coupe. That's the one we used to, they'd put us in the trunk to go to town. We were happy. We never thought anything about riding in the trunk. It was better than riding on a wagon. But then the Model A was pretty popular by that time because it was older, and the Model Ts were kind of passé. And the Model A had a fuel pump, not a fuel pump, but a water pump and an oil pump. And so they, so you could use regular antifreeze in them, and they didn't get hot. They didn't have a fuel pump because they had gravity fed. The gas tank was really like on your lap, and but and it had a good starter that worked, because the Model T, you always had to crank it. That's what they used to say it would kick like a mule, the Model T. But so by when the 35s came out, they would run 60 miles an hour, where a Model T, it took a heck of a Model T to get it up to 35, but you'd blow it up. So, but we'd start going to dances and such, and we'd go to, then finally we would go to the dances in Bel Air, and we would watch the CC boys. The CCC came out in 32. So we would be watching those boys with their fancy CCC on their collar and brass or whatever it is, and their khakis, and oh boy, we thought, oh my God, look at those beautiful clothes. So when 1938 came along, I was 15, but I was born in Detroit. So Earl Kenny, he was the youngest of the Kennys, and I was buddies at that point, because Winston was getting kind of crippled a lot. So we used to go to the dances near Bel Air every Saturday night. That's what we'd watch, and we'd dance a little bit. I was not that old, but if some woman would want me to let me dance with her, they would grab me and take me out there. But I guess I didn't know too much about the square dance. Probably made a lot of mistakes. But we decided as time went on, boy, we're going to go in the CCC. And so when I was 15, in 1938 in July. So by October, because I was born in Detroit, Earl Kenny, Cash's brother, and I was going to go, talking about it all these years. So we go in, sign up, and so we're ready to catch the train in Bel Air to go in the CC. And they caught him because he was born up there, and they said, you're not old enough to go in, even though he's older than I. So I remember waving goodbye to him, so I headed for the CCC camp. So that first night in the CCC camp, I never forget, they were lowering the flag, and a bugle was blowing, and the reveille they called it. And I'm all alone now. Earl wasn't there, and that was a lonesome time. I'm looking at that flag coming down. We were living in tents and no stoves in them. And boy, that was a bad time. It was already October. So we're up in that north country, up near Seney. And so that was the starting of the CCC. But as I went along in the CCC boys planted all the trees, took care of, made all the little bridges across the rivers, and they put the erosion type stuff. And they'd have to cut the wood, but they had 200 boys, but a big bunch. Most of them came from Detroit in the Hamtramck area, because they didn't mind working. They were mostly Polish kids, but they'd get in fights too. So, but that started to be a pretty good thing. So when I went down the line that first night when we got there, and they had the barracks bag, they called it, and they started putting my clothes in there, my khakis, 2 suits, 2 pairs of shoes, but no underwear. We had none, and but we had hats. And boy, I'll tell you what, when they were dropping that stuff in that bag, oh my gosh, look at all this nice stuff to wear now. My God, that's the stuff we seen when we were watching the boys dancing at the hall there in Bel Air. And so I was already there, but it was pretty lonesome without Earl. I'm all alone, and I'm younger than everybody by a couple of years. So that's where the CC started, and the CC's planted all the trees up there. And so my first job that they gave me was scalping the ground. Every 6 feet you'd take a grub hoe, and 100 guys would line up along a mile road, and the first guy would start, and then the next, and the next, because he had to follow what the first guy was doing. He'd be leading, and they'd have stakes for him to follow. And then every 6 feet in each direction, you planted a tree, but you had to grub the ground out. Six swings with the grub hoe. Then then the tree planters would come along with the trees in their bags, and they would have a spud, they called it, where they'd stick it in the ground, and then they'd put the tree in and stick it again, and then put their foot against it to push the hole together so the tree would grow. And they would be that. But that was a big job. By the time you went there all day, 8 hours of doing that, boy, you were ready to go to sleep, and you had calluses on your hands that wouldn't quit. And I don't remember ever having gloves. I don't remember them. If they had them, I can't remember seeing them or what they looked like. But we must have had them, and they were probably mittens. They wouldn't be gloves. But that's so. But after a little while, I was cutting wood, and I was cutting firewood, and I was doing stuff, and I was pushing a wheelbarrow while they was putting a trout feeding station in near Seney and on the Fox River. And so we were already in our winter camp. That was after about a month we were in the summer camp when we went there. So about January, they were saying that they're having a road test for truck drivers. But I knew how to double clutch, and because I knew how to drive I started driving when I was 13, and so I knew how to drive that Model T truck and such. And double clutch was a big word. Oh my boy, a guy was a hero could double clutch. So we knew why it was there, because the transmissions didn't have synchronizers in them. So you had to put it in neutral and let the clutch out again. That stopped all the gears, so you could change gears again. So they had about a 300-foot run from the docks where the trucks would park to load all the CC boys on to do their jobs. They had about 4 trucks that did that. And so they gave me a road test, and I double clutched, and I didn't hit a gear, as they called it. That would be because you could double clutch, you knew what to do. But the trucks were governed at 35 miles an hour. You just barely got it started, and the governor had shut it off. So I drove it out to the road, and so when I got to the road, he says, "You can be a driver." So I went back, and so the next day they put me on driving a dump truck. And so I knew how to drive, but the truck didn't. It was a new 38 Chevy. And boy, that was so nice next to a Model T. It was a nice dark green. There's 41865 was the number of it. It's in my book. But I remember driving that from Grand Marais. We had a rock crusher on the lake shore, Lake Superior, and they would crush the rock, and we'd haul it back, and that's what they put in the cement as they were building all the trout ponds on the trout feeding station that I worked at a little while before they made me a driver. I pushed a wheelbarrow. I remember that in the mud. That was a tough job too. But when they gave me that job, the only thing bad about it, the ice on the inside the windshield gets so thick we had to have some way, a piece of wood to scrape the ice off, because your breath would get on it. And because they didn't have any kind of heat in them. And heaters of that day didn't work anyway. We'd say, I can feel some heat. It would be so bad that, and they didn't have thermostats, so a car had to get pretty hot. But anyway, I drove that truck for about the winter, and then come spring, I was a pretty good driver because I got the experience from the farm, and so they put me driving what they called the camp truck, and that had to go to town every day to pick up the mail for the CC boys, 200 of them, and anything that would be extra food that you'd have to go in. And sometimes we'd go from camp to camp. We'd have to go to this camp or that camp. So I probably was at most of the camps in the eastern side of the Upper Peninsula. There's probably 6 or 7 of them that would I go to and pick up different things, maybe flour or whatever, and because we'd run out of it, so that camp would have it. And so that's what I do, the driving. Every day I'd go to town, and then when by the time we got to the summer camp again, that spring, there was a guy named Quello, and he was an Army officer. That's how he got the job to run the camp, because the part of the camp that was run by the Army, so to speak, took care of the people, and there was very few of them, maybe 20 people that would take care of getting the food together and washing the dishes and cooking and running the canteen and stuff like that. So I drove the truck for that purpose. For that, I started then when I was in there about maybe 4 months or so, but that was the best job, because then I'd go to town, and that truck had a heater in it. You could feel very little bit of heat, and that was a 35 truck, an Army truck, and that would then on Saturday nights they'd haul the guys to town to Newberry, or when we were in the summer camp, we'd take them to Munising, and I'd sit and wait for them, till they got, when the bars closed, they could come back, and things were pretty cheap, and they got that $5 a month. So that first couple of weeks of the month, they'd have some money to spend, and they'd buy a bottle of beer for 10 cents. But a Pepsi cost 5 cents, and a Mr. Goodbar weighed a quarter of a pound. That was one of the big ones we liked. That was 5 cents, a quarter of a pound. So on payday, we'd probably get a couple of those candy bars and a couple of Pepsis. They were 16-ounce Pepsis. But knee-high was delicious, but there wasn't as much of it as there was in a Pepsi. So we really would celebrate on the knee-high the first cut, then we'd go to the Pepsi because we got more. But so that was what I did for the rest of the time I was in the CCCs. I drove that. Then finally, I was making some money. $30 went home, and I got $5.31 went home, and I got $5 a month. And so then my dad bought me a 32 Ford Coupe for about $100. But remember this, he had now already several months of my $35, and he wouldn't spend it. Even though they needed it real bad, he never spent my money because he felt that it was mine. And I remember him writing me a letter one time, so you're a hero around here since you went in the CCCs, to give me some encouragement. He knew I was alone and young. But that's that CCCs, and when I wanted to stay, because they gave me a chance. They said you can get a deferment of some kind to stay another semester, another 6 months. And so I talked to my dad. I wrote him a letter right away. He said, no, you better come back, because he said, Uncle Loy has a job for you in his gas station, and he's going to give you a job. And so my uncle always felt that I'd take over the business someday. He had no kids. So my dad knew this, but so I started to work in the gas station then in the fall of 1938, and I was getting $25 week, boy, I was rich. I bought a 36 Ford right then for about 75 bucks or 65. Then I bought a 40 Ford about a year later for about 400 bucks. It only had 6,000 miles on it. So that cost the 600 or something like that. But I was making 20. My uncle paid the payments, and he insured it in his trucking. So he took good care of me, but everybody hated him because he was a businessman. So, but I worked in the gas station for about a year. Then I switched over and worked on the docks because I went from 25 bucks a week to 100. Then I had to go in a defense plant at that point because if you didn't, you got drafted, and I'd already spent 2 years in Army-type living, and so I didn't want to go in the service. So that's when I went in a defense plant. Then finally they drafted me in 1940. That's 2 years after, no, in 1942, because 41 the war started. So I was working in a defense plant, and they drafted me. That's when I went in the Navy and went to the Pointy Point Island as a machinist mate, a motor machinist mate, as they had no machinists. They didn't need any, so they made me a motor machinist mate, and that's what I was for the overhauling engines in the last year and a half. First year, 6 months, I was picking up the torpedoes. They'd run 200 a day and test them. They'd run, the little one was called a Mark 13. It would run 13 miles at 60 knots, 60 mile and an eighth an hour. And the big ones were 21s. They'd run 21 miles. Now the big ones were put in submarines. The little ones was on PT boats. And they were also dropped out of airplanes because they were shorter. You know, on PBY boats, they called them Y boats. They had, the torpedoes was under the wing, and they drop them to sink ships. So then I done my time in the Navy down there. But Detroit was a big thing. I lived near the ballpark. My uncle took me to one ball game, but I thought maybe I'd like it because we played ball in school. We had a softball and a stick for a bat. I don't know where the ball came from. But anyway, so after that, then I got out of the CCCs. And then we opened a garage in the Cass Corridor.